Wow, I mean, just wow, we finally got to 30,000 subscribers! Thank you all so much. I can't begin to tell you just how thankful I am for all of your support. Okay, actually, I guess I can, because we're talking about this again. Ren and Stimpy, adult party cartoon. I promise I don't like this show at all, yet I keep coming back to it again and again. Why is that exactly? Well, it's kind of interesting to talk about. I've been fascinated by this show ever since I was in 6th grade, and mostly because of just how inept and broken it is. Ren and Stimpy fans all across the board seem to agree that this is a fundamental betrayal of what made the original so good. There are so many people out there that talk about why this thing is bad, including yours truly, but not too many people seem to understand what exactly went into the show and what made it this. I guess it's time for me to step up to the plate and take one for the team. This, my friends, is our 30,000 subscribers special. Everything you need to know about Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon. First, a little background. The original Ren and Stimpy show premiered on Nickelodeon in 1991, and it was immediately a gigantic success. It was loud, it was crazy, it had amazing animation, and above all, it was unique. At least at the time, because in the subsequent years there would be tons of copycats, but at the time, if you wanted to see anything else like it on TV, too bad, you couldn't. Things weren't exactly going smoothly behind the scenes. There was a lot of incendiary content that John K tried to put in the show, and Nickelodeon wouldn't let him do it. And he kept delaying the episodes again and again because of his infamous perfectionism. Because of these two factors, John K was eventually kicked off his own show, and at the time, he was seen as the victim in all this. Some high-profile names like John Hughes, the guy who wrote the Home Alone movies, and Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, rallied behind him in support and solace. And only years later did that narrative change, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a topic for later in the video. John K did a bunch of smaller projects like the Ripping Friends in the subsequent years, but none of them ever reached the popularity of Ren and Stimpy. That is, of course, until he was approached by TNN, who would later be rebranded as Spike TV, specifically by Kevin Kay, the executive vice president of programming who himself used to work for Nickelodeon. He approached John K and convinced him to make an all-new, all-adult version of Ren and Stimpy. John K, eager to come back on the show, jumped at the opportunity, but only if he could get full creative control. Sure enough, that's exactly what Spike TV wanted, so John K took the deal and Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon was born. The reason they were able to do this, by the way, is because both Nickelodeon and Spike TV were owned by Viacom, so therefore, they both technically own the rights to Ren and Stimpy. Just thought I'd throw that in for a little bit of clarification. Now that Ren and Stimpy were coming back to TV, John K had to get the old team back together. And sure enough, he was able to get most of the crew, with some notable absences who refused to come back because they thought the show sucked. Most notably, Billy West. Not only had he sworn off working for John K forever because of his miserable time on the original Ren and Stimpy show, but with major successes like Futurama under his belt, Billy West was starting to have a much more substantial career than he did in 1991. So after getting some episode scripts mailed to him by John K, he took one look at them and went,
"No sir, I don't like it."
And he refused to come on board. But that's okay. John K could easily find a replacement for that treacherous fool. Which, by the way, were not his actual words, but they were his actual attitude. He ended up finding Eric Bauza, who, to his credit, did an amazing Stimpy impression, and if they couldn't get Billy West, they may as well get this guy who was doing a great job. In order to fill the void of those crew members who wouldn't come back, John K hired a bunch of newbies who grew up watching Ren and Stimpy and wanted to be a part of the new project. One of these was Katie Rice. Yeah, we'll come back to her later. The animation was done by Pip Animation and Carbuncle Cartoons. Yep, The very same carbuncle cartoons that would go on to make the haunted world of El Superbeasto, and now it all comes full circle, doesn't it? Right away, the old John K was back in action. And by that, I mean that he was a rampant perfectionist who would delay episodes again and again, and continuously put in inappropriate things where they really shouldn't go, even in an adult series. It's worth noting that despite promising John K creative control, they actually tried to get him to tone the show back in a few instances, specifically in the unaired episodes. John K, being John K, wouldn't listen and clung to the promise of full creative control. In terms of writing the show, all but one produced episodes were made based off of requests from the Nickelodeon days, and also were either direct adaptations or based on scripts from the Nickelodeon era as well. And I'm saying both of those because honestly, we can't really tell which is true. The most common story is that these actually were written during the Nickelodeon days, but a lot of people, sometimes myself depending on the day, really find it hard to believe that even John K, as warped as he is, could think that something like Naked Beach Frenzy or Stimpy's Pregnant would be okay for kids. Basically, what John K was trying to do with this show is give back to the fans who stuck by him throughout all these years. All these requests that they've wanted to see ever since they were little, now they finally get to come to life. Little did they know that it would be in the worst way possible, but still. Since there are so few episodes in the show, much like I did with Dave the Barbarian, I'm gonna talk about each one individually. However, unlike what I did with Dave the Barbarian, I'm not gonna review those one by one. I'm gonna go into the objective history and tell you how they all came to be. And trust me, when you hear the stories, it's gonna make a lot more sense. Firstly, the episode that started off Adult Party Cartoon was not actually from Adult Party Cartoon. It was Man's Best Friend, an episode that was made for Season 2 of Ren and Stimpy, but was not allowed to air because of a lot of things, honestly. Violence, tobacco references, toilet humor, abuse. It may have been too hot for Nickelodeon, but it was right up Spike TV's alley, and it finally got to see the light of day, airing alongside the uncut version of the pilot, Big House Blues. Since neither episode officially counted as an entry into the Adult Party Cartoon series, the night that Adult Party Cartoon aired not only featured these two episodes, but they also featured the first real episode, at least in terms of airing order, Onward and Upward. Real quick, funny thing about this episode is that even though it aired first, it actually has the last number on the production codes. Granted, all of these episodes were being worked on around the same time, but still. It's easy to say that this episode aired first because, in all honesty, knowing John K and his work ethic, this was probably the one that was done first. The story was originally made by Vincent Waller all the way back in 1991. The concept of this episode was based around a fan letter that John K got, requesting an episode that was nothing but gross-out jokes. Given the fact that John K loved this style of humor, he was all set and ready to make it, but Nickelodeon, how do I put this, they weren't thrilled about the idea. The main inspiration for the style, on the other hand, was the Three Stooges. Get used to hearing their names throughout this video because they surprisingly pop up a lot. Some of the crew members, like Eddie Fitzgerald, really liked the dramatic side of this episode, showing two people that weren't living in high society, but who were barely making ends meet and struggling to get by. Yeah, Eddie, that's totally what this episode's about. It's definitely not about Ren and Stimpy doing increasingly grosser things throughout the 22-minute runtime. Absolutely not! It's a dramedy. I think we all know that. It's kind of obvious with scenes like this and this. The gross-out jokes weren't the only fan service that John K decided to throw in. There was also the subplot of Ren and Stimpy officially being a gay couple. At least here, because John K would later say that their sexuality changes throughout the different episodes. Sometimes they're gay, sometimes they're straight, sometimes one's gay and the other's not. I think you get the idea by now, don't you? Back in the day, a lot of gay people would write into the show asking for John K to officially make them canonically gay. But John K. would always say something like this in response: "I don't know if they're gay, that's none of my business." But now they were. Even though Spike TV wasn't exactly happy with the implied anal sex scene, it's often believed that Onward and Upward script was the one that Billy West got when John K. was trying to get him to come back to the show, and he said such wonderfully complimentary things about it, like calling it an advertisement for NAMBLA and one gay joke that isn't funny to start with. Now on to Ren Seeks Help. This episode was written as a backlash to all the boring, stiff, dull cartoons of the 1980s. John K. cites cartoons like The Smurfs and Laverne and Shirley's animated series as his biggest targets. In exchange for being forced to work on all these boring shows that he hated back when he was first starting out, John K. decided to make the most messed up story he possibly could, and also one that went against the theory that he really seems to hate. The one that states that there are only 7 stories ever, and every other story is just an adaptation on one of these 7. In response, he decided to make an episode where a deranged cartoon character goes to therapy. Because I guess it's never been done before? This episode was written back in 1991, and Nickelodeon wasn't having any of it, citing it as being too dark and too intense. John K. seemed to take this pretty well, considering what the episode was supposed to be. A psychodrama, as he calls it, one that more focused on the tone, atmosphere, and story, rather than the humor that was going to be sprinkled all throughout. John got his father, Mr. Chris Falusi, to play Ren's dad, and his childhood friend Tom Hay to play the frog that Ren tortures all throughout the episode. It's also worth noting that a lot of people say that this episode was autobiographical for John K.'s childhood. And if that's true, that's really disturbing. The aim of Ren Seeks Help, you know, being a psychodrama that was trying to do something that had never been done before in animation, was all about trying to put the viewer on edge with grotesque imagery, dark colors, drawn-out shadows, and even a title card intro that's played backwards where the credits are shown first and the title card is shown last. The fan request for this one was showing more Ren insanity moments, so they decided to build off what they had with Space Madness and Stimpy's invention and go just a little bit further. Only a little bit. When the episode premiered, it was either considered the best episode or the least bad. It was also the fan favorite amongst the crew, except for Richard Purcell, who wrote the episode, who likes most of it but doesn't really care for the parts with the suicidal frog. But then the internet got a hold of the episode years later, and then, mostly without seeing the rest of the show, and branded it as a sin against humanity and a crime against animation. Only recently has the reputation started to recover, so it looks like we're going back to the way things used to be. Now it's time for Fire Dogs 2, the episode that we have the least amount of information on, so this one's gonna be kinda quick. John K. was kind of baffled that the original Fire Dogs episode was such a big hit, especially since the script was written in an afternoon and it was a quote-unquote cheater cartoon. But he knew a good thing when he saw it and decided to make a follow-up with Ralph Bakshi playing the Fire Chief. Ralph Bakshi, for those of you who don't know, is the legendary adult animator who made movies like Fritz the Cat, The Lord of the Rings, not that Lord of the Rings, the other one, there we go.
You cannot pass!
Wizards, Hey Good Lookin', and Cool World. Oh, and also he made The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, which John K. worked on before, and became John K.'s protege during his time on the show.
So he said, that's a great idea, Johnny.
Come on, Johnny, let's get to work!
He and Ralph got into all kinds of crazy situations, and John decided to put them all in Fire Dogs 2. The whole thing was basically a giant in-joke, with John retelling a lot of his stories about Ralph Bakshi and the crazy things they'd get up to, and Nickelodeon said no. Partially because of the content, and partially because Nickelodeon wanted absolutely nothing to do with Ralph Bakshi. But now that Ren and Stimpy was back, John gave Ralph a call, and Ralph was super excited to come on the show.
Wasn't I great?
It didn't hurt that the Fire Chief was always based on Ralph Bakshi, definitely more of a loose adaptation than the one in Fire Dogs 2. In Fire Dogs 2, it's basically just a slightly exaggerated version of Ralph. At least as far as I can gather. Since Ralph Bakshi himself is basically a real-life cartoon character, I can see him doing a lot of what was in the episode. This episode was also the first time, at least in airing order, where the episodes really started to show that making John K the creative force of the show with no restrictions was not a good idea. What do I mean by this? Is it that the content that's in Fire Dogs 2 is somehow even worse than the stuff that was in Onward and Upward and Ren Seeks Help? Nope, I'm talking about the fact that John K didn't know how to keep a runtime consistent. This is because John kept putting in new things, new gags, new jokes, new scenes, and it just made the episode bloated and unable to fit in the 30-minute time slot when you include commercials.
Honey, I'm home.
That and the fact that he had these live-action Honeymooners segments introducing the show starring Ralph Bakshi himself meant that the episode was gonna have to be split in two when it first aired. Except that wasn't gonna be an easy thing to do because Fire Dogs 2 on its own is about 30 minutes. So they can't just split the episode in half, but they can't air it all at once either, so what are they gonna do?
I need to be a star, one with the stars! My face on the moon!
Air Fire Dogs 1 right alongside it, of course. And then next week they would wrap up Fire Dogs 2 and then hopefully go on to the next episode forgetting about this whole mess.
We get to do it all again next week!
Also, I just want to take a quick moment to brag here, but this tape I have in my hands, this is the original airing of Fire Dogs 2, and also some episodes of Gary the Rat and Stripperella, but when watching the original broadcast, I tried to put myself into the headspace of someone watching it for the first time, and wow, it feels like a big whiplash and kind of a waste of time. You barely get any of the story. I'm trying my hardest not to really throw my opinions in here very much, and I really want to make this as objective as possible, but it's really weird. You get the original short, and then you just get the first act of the second, and it doesn't feel like a full experience. Sure, Fire Dogs 2 doesn't exactly have a story anyways.
Aw, crap!
But still, it's just strange, you know? This would also be the last episode of Adult Party Cartoon to ever air in the United States. This is because the other 3 episodes, especially the next one, had a lot of content that wasn't exactly safe for TV. That, and they also had a bunch of delays going on behind the scenes, and once again, just like Fire Dogs 2, they all way overshot the 22-minute time limit, so airing them would kind of cause a big mess.
John Chrisfalusi. You idiot.
The show was also getting in a lot of trouble around this time. Much like Drawn Together when they decided to get even raunchier for season 3, Adult Party Cartoon was starting to face a large backlash from its advertisers and they wanted nothing to do with it. So for the longest time, the show just lived in rerun form on Spike TV until they decided to cancel it along with the rest of their animated shows, and it was never aired on mainstream TV again. They were able to keep the reruns going because, well, it doesn't cost anything to run reruns, so why not keep it going?
I've seen this one. It's a classic.
Plus, they were consistently experiencing high ratings, even though the fans didn't exactly like the show very much. We'll touch on that more later, but I think it's worth noting now that the other episodes were going to have an even harder time airing because a lot of people were not happy with the way things were going. They didn't like how the characters were being portrayed, they didn't like the overly raunchy humor, and they didn't like how things were just drawn out and bloated to fit the runtime. And since the next 3 episodes would have even more of that, it wasn't really going to be a safe venture to put them on TV, especially when their adult cartoon block wasn't exactly the success that they were hoping for. Okay, so that didn't turn out to be so brief after all, but oh well, I hope you enjoyed it. Anyways, on to Naked Beach Frenzy. Yikes. This is the episode that Spike TV liked the least. Why? Well, it's in the name, Naked Beach Frenzy. They felt that the episode went way too far, which is kind of weird because John K actually tried to restrict himself when making the episode, specifically in putting nipples on the naked girls. But then Kevin K said that it was okay to go all out, and then John K went way all out, and Spike TV wasn't so happy.
You idiot.
Here's basically how it went. Make Naked Beach Frenzy really raunchy. No, go back! Speaking of not making the episode as raunchy, back when it was originally written in the Nickelodeon era, Naked Beach Frenzy wasn't as extreme. It was still not okay for kids,
Put some clothes on!
but it wasn't as on the nose. Then it got touched up when it aired on Spike TV, and it became the infamous episode that made the show, well, infamous. Now this is where we come back to Katie Rice. For those of you who don't know, Katie Rice was one of John K's grooming victims and she worked on this episode. But not just that, she was in this episode as one of the naked girls on the beach. I would like to say that she's of age in this episode, but given the fact that it's made by John K and we know his taste in women very clearly,
he's underage too.
Yeah, very nice.
That makes this episode even more uncomfortable to watch. Despite this being the episode that caused the most problems with the network behind the scenes, this is the episode that got advertised the most when Adult Party Cartoon made its way to DVD, even being on the front cover. What can I say? John K knows what we like. Talking about Altruist is like talking about a migraine. This thing is awful. Like Onward and Upward, Altruist is based on the Three Stooges, but this time it's way more obvious. The whole point of this episode was to follow the story beats of a typical Three Stooges cartoon, but make it as messed up as possible. This episode was not conceived during the Nickelodeon era, and out of all 6 episodes that got made, this was the only one that was created during John K's time at Spike TV. Specifically over several breakfast meetings where they were coming up with future episode ideas for if they got a season 2. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Anything went with this episode. If you wanted to throw in a small joke, or a split-second gag, or a long, stretched-out moment that was all your own, you could totally do it. John K wanted to utterly baffle the viewer and make them look at the screen going, "What?" This includes the infamous log sawing scene, which, funny enough, John K says was actually not based on homosexual acts, but was based on how men and women view sex. Sure, John. Keep telling yourself that. I'm sure it'll come true one of these days. This seems to be the general favorite amongst the crew. Sure, some said that Ren Seeks Help was their favorite, but for the most part, this is the one that they gush about the most. In fact, it gets the most coverage on the DVD. But it's not talking about anything really interesting or how it got made or anything. It's all about how they think it was so wonderful and how that John K is ready to make a movie after making this. Must we go through the John K. Coraline sketch again? It wouldn't work. Altruist is also the longest episode of either version of Ren and Stimpy, clocking in at around 45 minutes. Oh, and also Plucky Duck is in this episode as a grown adult. Moving on. The last episode of the show to be completed was Stimpy's Pregnant. This is considered to be the grossest episode of the show, which is kind of weird. Onward and Upward was meant to be nothing but gross-out jokes, but this is considered to be worse? I gotta say, after watching the episode though, yeah, I can see it. It doesn't bother me specifically, but I can easily see how it would bother someone else. John K conceived this episode on day 1 of working with Nickelodeon, and again, they didn't like it. The Three Stooges were once again a big inspiration for the humor, but as for the story, this is where things get a little weird. John K based it on the pregnancy of one of his co-workers, Anne-Marie Roberts. She shows up in the DVD commentary too, and a lot of people talk about how Katie Rice seems uncomfortable in it. Take a look at Anne-Marie. Look into her eyes, you can see her soul dying within the first 10 seconds. What would happen is that she would tell John K some stories and he'd write it down going, "Oh yeah, that's good, let's put that in. Only let's make it a little crazier and make it more Ren and Stimpy-ish." The episode was modeled after things you would see on I Love Lucy or The Honeymooners, even including a laugh track. And also, according to John K, Stimpy is officially a woman in this episode, but only sometimes. This is also one of the few episodes that has a deleted scene. It was all about BDSM and Stimpy, force intercoursing Ren. Glad we didn't get to see that.
Okay.
And that was it for Adult Party Cartoon. There was originally supposed to be 9 episodes, but Spike TV decided to cut it short when they realized this show wasn't going to have a future. Why bother keeping it around? For the record, here were some of the unfinished episodes that we heard about years later. Life Sucks, which was basically Ren telling Stimpy about the Children's Crusade, and this officially being what set Stimpy off in the beginning of Ren Seeks Help. There's an animatic of part of the episode available, and The Big Switch was a sequel to Ren Seeks Help. Man, they really wanted to follow up on that episode, didn't they? Where it's actually just kind of a remake of Who's Stupid Now, where Ren becomes the idiot and Stimpy becomes the jerk. There was going to be an episode all about the Shampoo Master character from Naked Beach Frenzy, another George Liquor episode, several unproduced shorts including a return of Powdered Toast Man, and the Succubus. The now infamous episode where John K tries to lure Robin Bird back by making an episode all about their abusive relationship. Not Katie Rice as I claimed in the John K video, by the way. The show was intended to come back around 2004 with a new show called Immigrants, but considering the advertiser revolt, the negative reaction from fans, and the production difficulties, the show was never brought back. Kevin Kay, again the executive vice president of programming, claimed that they originally stopped rerunning the show so that people wouldn't get burnt out on it before new episodes came, even though it's kind of clear in retrospect that they just wanted it off the network as quickly as possible. He also mentions in that same interview that John K kept pulling the episodes back to tweak and add more things, which just goes to show that he learned nothing from his run-in with Nickelodeon. The story that Kay paints here is that at first the network was really excited, but then they got really impatient with the production difficulties and John K making things that were not exactly advertiser friendly. So they felt it was best to part ways. This ended up being a good idea because the reputation of Ren and Stimpy was officially destroyed. It would be a very long time before Viacom was willing to do anything with them whatsoever. Billy West has since expressed relief that he didn't come on the show, saying that it would have damaged his career. And it was also kind of the death of Spumco as well. They never made anything else after this, and due to some legal trouble with Bob Jacques, Spumco ended up closing down in 2005. And not too long later came the Ren and Stimpy Lost Episodes DVD. And this DVD is awful, by the way. Again, I have to be non-objective here. When you look on the back of this thing, it's just about impossible to read what's going on, and they omit several episodes, and you have to turn it upside down to read parts. It's a mess. But hey, it features an intro with Weird Al Yankovic.
What was I gonna say, no?
Here he implies that the way he met John K was by hiring him to work on the Close But No Cigar video, and he also spends a lot of the time talking about how other people in his family hate the show.
My wife hates these cartoons. Hates them. Hates them!
Yeah, I think he's trying to warn us about something here. In later years, a lot of people who worked on the show would later disown it, especially John K, who would claim that executive meddling was the reason that the show sucked, despite the fact that there are a lot of documents, commercials, and interviews where he states the opposite. As I've said before, John K isn't exactly a reliable source when it comes to all things John K, and I think he's just trying to save face here because he's finally come to terms with the fact that this wasn't a very good show.
No, sir, I didn't like it.
And that, friends, is everything you need to know about Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon. Is it as bad as everyone says? I mean, yeah, depending on the episode. But I think now it's easier to see just how the show came to be such a big mess. Just like Spike TV planned, it was the Nickelodeon era on steroids. Problems and all. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? What do you think about Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, and what were some of the most interesting production notes that went on behind the scenes? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And now it's time to thank our wonderful Patreon people, Masters of Fate, Manny Paredes, Kev, Leaf Storm, and Ryan Williams. And let's not forget our executive producers, Azarius, Unkale, Blackjack, Edward Haas, H.R. Hoffman, Who Else But Zane, YouTube Milkwad, Albert Robinson, I Am Fove, and Aaron Vasquez. If you would like to be just like these wonderful people and have your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then why not consider donating to the Patreon? It doesn't cost a lot, and there's a fancy little link in the description for you to click on. And before I go, I just want to thank you guys one more time for bringing me to 30,000 subscribers. I didn't think we were ever going to get this big when we first started out. Not even close. I thought our peak would have been, I don't know, 5,000 max? But here we are. I'm so happy I was wrong. Here's hoping we get to 40k soon, because I've got another special video in mind, but that's a story for another day. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.